New York City is known worldwide for its sky-high rent prices. With the economic downturn caused by the coronavirus pandemic, those sentiments have been exacerbated, forcing many to rethink their housing options in Gotham. Amina Bawani is a millennial who works in biotech and has lived in New York for 10 years. Due to the fluctuating rental market, she's thinking about possibly saying goodbye to the big city.
Pandemic exposed the vulnerabilities of the city and made me and many New Yorkers who've lived here 10 years or more realize that we were only here for the social life, and that's completely changed.
New York City, once the nationwide epicenter of the coronavirus pandemic, has seen over 33,000 deaths. The unemployment rate in the Big Apple was 16% in August, about twice the national average, and as a result, the median rental price in Manhattan was down 7.1% in September compared to the same time last year, according to real estate company Douglas Elliman.
The rental market has undeniably dropped a lot, substantially, since the pandemic happened. The market is down 20%, broadly down 20%. Some places drop more than 20%. And the reason is simple, because the city we lost 500,000 people since March, and majority of those people were renters.
While many New Yorkers felt the economic sting due to losing income, many individuals, like Crystal Bai, were insulated due to having the ability to work remotely, which provides stronger job stability.
When the pandemic happened in New York City, especially during March and April, I wasn't worried financially because I have a stable job and I knew that my job wouldn't be impacted.
Although some real estate insiders say that the market is the lowest it's been in decades, many renters still don't feel that impact in their pocketbooks.
My rent hasn't decreased, and that's what's really unfortunate. You're seeing so many people being hit by it, and I'm one of them. But I understand that the city's not willing to take a cut, and so I'm struggling, and I'm having to really be on the edge while trying to also make sure that I don't get sick and get infected.
Face masks, social distancing. This is the new normal in 2020 as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. Starting in March, non-essential businesses, restaurants, and schools shut down for the unforeseeable future. Green Fitness Studio, located in East Williamsburg, Brooklyn, like many gyms across the country, were no exception. Marcus Thomas is a personal trainer at the gym. He says actions that he put in place years ago have helped his business thrive throughout the pandemic.
About 2 years ago, I actually started virtual training, and so I was already into virtual training. So for some of my clients who didn't want to go to the park, we would do the virtual training online through video call, and that was very effective. New York Governor Andrew Cuomo gave the green light for gyms and fitness centers to open on August 24th. But out of abundance of caution, Green Fitness waited nearly 2 months later, on October 19th, to make sure it met all COVID-19 and social distancing regulations. As many people wondered how they can stay in shape without the opening of gyms, Thomas believes that any environment can be a gym environment. As a trainer, we should be able to train a client anywhere. So whether if it's in the gym, whether if it's in the park, whether if it's right on the street, you can train somebody there. Avid gym goers who had to get their workout fix during the lockdown resorted to in-home workouts, YouTube tutorials, and just working out at local parks to stay in shape, say that they can't wait to come back to the gym to pump some iron, given proper safety measures are implemented.
I would just say that they're invited to come, look around. If they feel safe, they're more than welcome to come. We try our best to make everything clean, make them feel that they're safe here.
Election, what does vaccine actually mean for dollar going forward? Well, I mean, I think particularly with the vaccine, it is good news. Now, it's quite interesting because we have seen since Monday and that Pfizer news, we've seen a lot of politicians and central bankers, begin to push back, say, look, we're in for a couple of bad quarters still, a really difficult winter, both from health perspective in Europe and the US, and of course economically too. And yet, what we've seen, I think, from the markets really since the global financial crisis and that advent of huge amounts of quantitative easing and cheap money is the market's ability to be sensitive to bad news is sort of cushioned. The blanket of cheap money is provide exactly that, a safety blanket, and the market tends to look through bad news perhaps a lot swifter, a lot quicker than it would have done before the global financial crisis. So I think the market has a tendency to ignore the fact that we do have a couple of bad quarters, price in perhaps a better time ahead. Yes, there's been a little bit of position adjustment since the movement, that rotation on Monday, Tuesday, but I think it probably means that the likelihood we're going to see a big surge in the safe haven dollar is now far less likely.
Infections rising. What are the chances that actually in certain parts of the world, I'm thinking of Europe, maybe the UK, we see a double dip recession?
So the first thing I think we ought to talk about with regard to that is that, yes, there's been positive growth off of a very, very depressed second quarter. But from level terms, we actually aren't out of a recession right now. When we think about the labor market performance, when we think about aggregate demand, we're not actually out of a recession. So double dip maybe is a misnomer.
What is the biggest risk that we're underestimating at the moment, Catherine? It seems that, China's doing okay. Chinese stocks were rising on the back of a possible Joe Biden presidential win. But if the rest of the world isn't buying their things, then actually China will be in trouble too.
Well, China is a country that has been able to use export growth in order to support its GDP growth. That's kind of been a standard playbook for them. But it is also the case that they have been ramping up their own expenditures internally, both consumption, principally investment, but consumption has been coming back a bit as well. It's also an economy that doesn't depend as much on exports as it used to. So China can use internal demand, particularly supported by fiscal policy, in order to probably stay the course. In other words, continue to grow. But it's not a global economy that is in good shape. In the last 2 months, in our September and our October outlooks, we've downgraded global growth 30 basis points each month. So for a total of 60 basis points downgrade over the last 2 months for global growth in 2021. So if you're a private sector and you're looking at that and you're saying, should I invest? Should I do capacity development through CapEx? The answer is no, because you're not looking at a growing marketplace. So when business investment is moribund, in contraction in most cases, it's a real challenge to get domestic demand-led growth.
Dr. Mann, I've got to ask you a pro question. I was honored to have Alan Ruskin of Deutsche Bank on with us yesterday, and now you, off the fears of a weak dollar. I did the fancy math, and off of Plaza Louvre in the 1980s, we saw a 28% plunge in the dollar off of a 2 standard deviation excess. That seems unimaginable now. Do you have a weak dollar fear, or can it be contained and not like the early 1980s?
I think that back in the 1980s, you had policy intervention, and that was part of it. But the second thing is that I think that there was more opportunity for other economies to have their currencies appreciate. There was more room for them to be able to absorb an appreciation of their currencies as the dollar depreciated. This time around, there's not a lot of room. And there's also not, when we look at the prospects around the world for which economies might be doing better and therefore be attractive to capital inflows and therefore have their currencies appreciate, you can't really find a whole lot. Some scattered, improvements in some of the emerging markets that have done well, sort of in the Asian bloc. But none of those markets are big enough to really absorb the type of capital flows that we would be talking about. So, we always get to be talking about currencies as relative prices. You can't talk about a dollar depreciation or dollar weakness in isolation. It's always relative to something else. And I think, especially in light of the COVID second wave in Europe, it really puts a damper on the euro as a currency to
says, you know what, I'm fed up with the lockdowns, I'm fed up with the restrictions, and it does seem that there's, restriction fatigue, not only in the US, but across the world. What are the figures and numbers that you remind them of?
Well, first of all, I point out that there really, at least in the United States, aren't lockdowns at the moment. People are not recommending lockdowns. They're recommending reasonable steps in vigilance and, not pretending that the virus isn't here. And I remind them that 215,000 people have already died in the United States, and it is not hard at all to imagine another 215,000 and then another 215,000 dying if we decide that we're just going to let everybody get the virus, which seems to be some people's strategy, but really is a strategy of giving up.
What do we know about the Pfizer vaccine? It seems that they actually would be ready to, start for an application in November. November is a couple of weeks, away. Are they the first ones to get it right?
Well, we have no idea because they haven't reported the studies yet. I think what they're saying is that they will have the first read of the studies with including data on safety sometime in November. And I certainly hope that it's positive, that it looks good, and that the FDA will look at it carefully, convene an advisory committee, and then we'll all be able to look at the data. And if that happens, I think we'll at least have one vaccine, which is great. And then there'll be other studies that'll read out, and we'll have a chance to get more.
How do you, convince citizens that we're not doing this too fast, that it's, the track record of safety that will dictate the timeline?
Well, I think the Food and Drug Administration has a very important role to play, as do all political leaders, in saying, well, the study is done, let's take it one step at a time, and, in short order, convene independent experts, release a bunch of the data, allow people to look at it, and give, a little bit of room for people to really take a look and say, wow, this really works, and it has a very strong safety record. And if people do that, I think the medical professional feel confident, many people will feel confident, and it'll be the science driving the discussion rather than people hopping up and down, and just pointing and saying, just take the vaccine. That's what we don't want.
Why are we seeing so many new cases in the US and Europe? Is it a second wave, or is it seasonal, or is it because some of the restrictions were relaxed, too soon or by too much?
Is there an all of the above option? I mean, I think all of those things are contributing. Clearly there's pandemic fatigue. Clearly there were some restrictions were relaxed quickly. And I just think in general, the weather is probably not helping because it's driving people indoors. And that's why we're going to get a wave. That is exactly what's happening now. And the question is, how big a wave are we going to get? And can we get control of it? And that is really going to depend on leadership. And it's going to depend on people's ability to really, go back to the basics of what kept us under control.